She just broke in two and the ends were sticking up. She just broke in two and the ends were sticking up.
First the middle seemed to go down, lifting bow and stern into the air. First the middle seemed to go down, lifting bow and stern into the air.
The Titanic was torn in two. For a moment the great masses of steel and iron poised in the air. Then slowly they sank.
We heard a fearful explosion. I saw the ship split open. At the same time, the ship's bow rose up in the air as the steamer sank towards the center.
The bow, which had been pointing downwards, dipped, turned up again, writhed, and sank with the stern, exactly as though one had stepped on a worm. The bow, which had been pointing downwards, dipped, turned up again, writhed, and sank with the stern, exactly as though one had stepped on a worm.
The halves seemed to rise out of the water, gaining impetus for the great trip to the bottom.
The forward end, the bow, elevated at an angle high out of the water, floated for a few minutes and then disappeared, while the stern section rose out of the water as if it had been hinged and stood at right angles to the sea.
He said. The bow sank, and then rose in the air. Then came a third boiler explosion. The ship buckled amidships and sank.
The bow seemed to bob up and then break clean off, like a piece of carrot.
When the water got into the engine room there was an explosion, and then I saw the Leviathan part in the middle. The stern rose high in the air, the bow less high. The stern rose high in the air, the bow less high.
With explosions, the ship seemed to break in two, and the forward end bounded up again for an instant, and the forward end bounded up again for an instant, and the forward end bounded up again for an instant.
The Titanic broke in half and both ends turned up.
The ship, after going down by the head, again came up, and then buckled in the middle.
The two ends of the ship, which we could trace by the lights, appeared to rise up.
Then suddenly there was another great explosion, and the bow gave a sort of jump, and then seemed to wrench away from the middle portion, and the bow gave a sort of jump, and then seemed to wrench away from the middle portion.
I reached a collapsible boat that was fastened to the deck. The Titanic gave a lurch downwards, and we were in the water up to our hips. She rose again slightly, and I succeeded in cutting the second rope. She rose again slightly, and I succeeded in cutting the second rope.
Before I had swam more than 10 feet, I felt the deck come up under me, and I found we were high and dry. I felt the deck come up under me, and I found we were high and dry.
Suddenly, the whole superstructure of the ship appeared to split, well forward to midship, and bow or buckle upwards, and bow or buckle upwards.
Suddenly, her nose, on which I was, seemed to suddenly rise from underneath the water. Suddenly, her nose, on which I was, seemed to suddenly rise from underneath the water.
It broke in two, and both parts rose into the sky and sank.
First one end of the steamer lifted, then the other.
I could see through the darkness the bow of the boat rise high in the air as she broke in two. Bow and stern stood up in sharp outline for a second or two.
The ship broke in two in the middle, and buckled, the middle of the ship going down first.
The Titanic doubled up in the middle, like a great V, then she broke in two, her bow, its plates bent, twisted and torn by the shock, rose up a little way, and the stern also went up in the air. Everyone left on board was slid down in a heap in the center.
There was a tremendous noise. Bow and stern of the ship seemed to rise, and the two middle portions of the boat sank together.
We had heard a couple of explosions when we were near the boat, and then out there, we heard the big one which broke her in two. It was hard to see the forward half very distinctly because the lights had gone out of it. The back half was still brightly illuminated, however. Some of these steerage women thought the forward half, which appeared like a big black shadow, which was another boat we had run into. Then there were a lot more little explosions coming rapidly one after another.
Can you say in relation to the forefunnel, at what point the ship broke off?
About the second funnel from forward, between the first and second funnel from forward.
Then I saw that everyone had been swept into the forecastle head. I saved myself by clinging onto the davit winch. I looked down the forecastle and saw the most horrible, heart-rending scenes I have ever witnessed. There were women and children and firemen and stewards all fighting, praying, shrieking for help in their death struggles.
I thought when I looked that the ship broke at the foremost funnel.
We saw the forepart of the ship break away up to the foremost funnel.
The bow parted just in a line with the bridge.
The ship seemed to break in two, forward of the first funnel.
The ship broke into three. First the bow detached itself, then the middle disappeared with a hiss like the sound of 1,000 blazing rockets, and then finally the aft part of the hull dipped over.
The sight was awful. I shall never forget it, for she broke in 3 pieces.
It seemed to writhe, breaking into the 3 parts into which it was divided. First the middle seemed to go down, lifting bow and stern into the air. Then it twisted the other way.
Suddenly there was a terrible crash, and the great ship appeared to split in 2, if not in 3, distinct sections.